what you would do if an active duty Air Force unit was called in to help participate in quelling protests or participating in immigration raids. What would you do standing there holding the line, not knowing that the American people are scared that these assets could be used inside the United States?
So been a commander 9 times. I've gotten orders many times to include using force. And every time I get one of those orders, what I do is I check the law, and I don't take the word of anybody else. I get in the room with my lawyer, chapter and verse. What's the law? If the order is legal, I'm permitted to execute that order. And in the case of a senior commander, you have to make sure that everyone in your unit understands what the rules are with respect to using force, whether that's against an enemy or in the case of a domestic, the appropriate escalation. So they have to know what those rules are. If the order is not legal, you go back to the issuing authority and you discuss that with them and you say, boss, that I don't see how you got to legality on this one. We can't do that.
This
or
may look like a routine oversight question, but it's actually a stress test of America's constitutional boundaries. What's really being tested here is not one general's judgment, but whether military power inside the United States remains constrained by law when public fear and political pressure collide. This raises broader questions about civilian control, lawful authority, and how far federal power can reach before it begins to erode democratic trust. In this video, we'll break down how a single line of questioning exposes the fault line between national security and domestic restraint, and why that line matters more now than ever.
Welcome, General, and welcome to your family. If you're getting down to my end of the dais, you're almost done, so it's almost over. General Wilsbach, thank you for coming and meeting in my office. We talked about the great excitement that we had in Michigan when the President of the United States announced on April 29th that Selfridge Air Force Base in Macomb County was going to be getting a replacement fighter mission, a bunch of F-15s to replace our retiring A-10s. The President came to Michigan, made this big announcement to great fanfare. We're very excited about it. This is something that our federal and state officials have been working on for a long time, about a decade, so it was the culmination of a lot of that. But we are hearing that the bureaucrats at the Pentagon are looking to push out the arrival of those F-15s, delay the arrivals, such that we'd have a gap. We'd retire our A-10s, all our pilots, all our mechanics, all our logisticians would depart, and then something like years later, we'd get this fighter mission and lose all that good training and manpower that we have. The official documents that we saw were that these fighters were going to be arriving in FY28. That makes sense to us because I'm assuming President Trump wants to be in office when those fighter jets arrive, and that is the timeline we are looking for. So if confirmed, can you tell me what you will do to ensure that we live up to the President, the Commander-in-Chief's timeline of getting those heel-to-toe fighter jets in?
What just happened is a clear assertion of political commitment colliding with bureaucratic delay. Why it matters is that military readiness depends on continuity, not promises that fade into administrative gaps. What it leads to is a broader question of whether national defense planning is driven by strategy or by convenience.
Into Michigan.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I appreciate you asking me the questions. Well, first of all, I am super excited for Selfridge, not only to get the F-15 squadron, but also a KC-46 squadron. The associated infrastructure improvements that come along with those two platforms, I think are going to make Selfridge Air Force Base, Air National Guard Base, the best base in the country. I mean, because you're going to have—
From your lips to God's ears, we're thrilled.
You're going to have the most modern aircraft and facilities that go along, so we're excited. Yes, you do have my commitment to work with you. We, as you know, as we phase out the A-10 and move into the F-16, we have to train all the crews and all of the maintainers as well as the pilots. So they can't step out of an A-10 one day and into an F-15 the next. So usually there's about a year and a half, 6 months to a year and a half of training for those crews, and so we'll have to work that timing. But you're right, FY28 is when the F-15 should arrive.
Great. Well, we look forward to working with you on that and holding to that. On the refuelers, we were very happy that the former Secretary of the Air Force announced 12 refuelers also to replace our current refueler mission. We're now hearing whispers again from the bureaucrats at the Pentagon that it may not be 12, that it could be a lesser number. We went and looked around, did our homework, in places like New Hampshire and New Jersey, the package is 12. So do I have your commitment that we will keep the 12 as announced by the Secretary of the Air Force?
Let me work with you on that. I know what was said before. I also know what the service is saying now, and also what the state is feeding back to us as well. So I'd like to work with you more on that.
What just happened is an attempt to keep options open without firm guarantees. Why it matters is that defense infrastructure relies on predictability to function effectively. What it leads to is growing skepticism about whether announced commitments truly bind the system.
Okay, we'd like to receive the commitment that we were presented with, but look forward to pushing and pulling on that with you in the future. And then just lastly, I mean, on a totally different topic, I mean, it's hard to have a hearing like this and not let the news of the country come into the room. We are watching National Guard be deployed into American cities. We're watching, in some cases, active duty being sent into American cities. And over the weekend, there was a leaked conversation about potentially sending in the 82nd Airborne, an active duty Army unit, not Air Force. But that unit has Apache helicopters, it has Black Hawk helicopters, Chinooks. Again, not Air Force assets, but air assets. And I think the idea that air assets would ever be used in American cities really sends a shiver down the spine of most Americans. So tell me.
What just happened is a tonal shift from logistics to legitimacy. Why it matters is that the public draws a hard line between external defense and internal force. What it leads to is a deeper examination of who decides when that line can be crossed.
What you would do if an active duty Air Force unit was called in to help participate in quelling protests or participating in immigration raids. What would you do standing there holding the line, not knowing that the American people are scared that these assets could be used inside the United States?
So been a commander 9 times. I've gotten orders many times to include using force. And every time I get one of those orders, what I do is I check the law, and I don't take the word of anybody else. I get in the room with my lawyer, chapter and verse, what's the law? If the order is legal, I'm permitted to execute that order. And in the case of a senior commander, you have to make sure that everyone in your unit understands what the rules are with respect to using force, whether that's against an enemy or in the case of a domestic, the appropriate escalation. So they have to know what those rules are. If the order is not legal, you go back to the issuing authority and you discuss that with them and you say, boss, that I don't see how you got to legality on this one. We can't do that, or you have to give me a different order.
Well, we hold you to that. Thank you very much. I yield back.
What just happened is a rare on-the-record acknowledgement that legality overrides hierarchy. Why it matters is that military obedience without legal restraint undermines democratic governance. What it leads to is accountability, not just for commanders, but for those who issue the orders. This hearing wasn't about aircraft, budgets, or bases. It was about whether the rule of law still governs the most powerful institutions in the country. Democratic integrity depends on leaders who understand that authority ends where legality does. When restraint holds, trust survives. When it doesn't, the consequences ripple far beyond any single decision. Accountability is not optional in a democracy. It is the foundation of it. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to expose the truth.